The heart monitor's steady beeping was the last thing I heard before the anesthesia pulled me under. Dr. Rebecca Chen, my sister, though no one at St. Mary's Hospital knew we were related, squeezed my hand one final time before I drifted into unconsciousness. The emergency appendectomy that had brought me here at 2 a.m. was supposed to be routine. What I didn't know was that while I lay vulnerable on the operating table, my husband Marcus was already making phone calls that would change everything. "She's finally out," Marcus whispered into his phone from the hospital corridor, his voice carrying that familiar tone he used when he thought he was being clever. I couldn't hear him, of course. I was unconscious. My body opened up under Rebecca's skilled hands. But the hospital security cameras were recording everything. And later, those recordings would become the foundation of justice I never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had been waiting for this opportunity for months. What he didn't realize was that Rebecca, behind her surgical mask and focused on saving my life, was about to discover just how far my husband's greed extended. The irony was perfect. The man trying to profit from my vulnerability had no idea that my protector shared my DNA. Let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about one night of betrayal. It's about 3 years of carefully constructed deception that led to the most devastating revelation of my life. I met Marcus Chen. Yes, we shared a last name after marriage, though we weren't related, at a medical conference in Chicago. I was there representing my pharmaceutical consulting firm, and he was charming the room as a medical device sales representative. Tall, confident, with the kind of smile that made hospital administrators open their checkbooks, Marcus seemed like everything I'd been looking for. He was attentive, supportive of my career, and claimed to understand the demands of the medical field. What I didn't see then was how carefully he'd studied me before our chance meeting. How he'd researched my company, my background, my financial status. Marcus was a predator who specialized in successful women, and I was his perfectly selected target. Our courtship was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as romance. He brought me flowers on stressful days, remembered every detail I shared about my work, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts on healthcare policy. When I mentioned my estranged relationship with my family, a carefully guarded secret I'd rarely shared, he positioned himself as the understanding partner who would help me heal those wounds. "Family can be complicated," he'd said, stroking my hair as we lay in bed one evening. "Sometimes we have to create our own." At the time, I thought he meant building a life together. I didn't realize he was subtly encouraging my isolation from the few blood relatives I had left. Rebecca and I had been distant since our parents' death 5 years earlier. A stupid fight about their estate had driven a wedge between us that pride kept firmly in place. She'd become a surgeon, following the path our father had always wanted for both of us. I'd chosen the business side of medicine instead, and somehow that choice had created a chasm between us that felt impossible to bridge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marcus encouraged that distance without ever saying so directly. When I mentioned thinking about reaching out to Rebecca, he'd make subtle comments about people who chose their careers over family, or suggest that I'd be opening old wounds. His influence was so gradual, so seemingly caring, that I never recognized the isolation he was orchestrating. The red flags were there from the beginning, but Marcus was skilled at explaining them away. The expensive watch he wore despite claiming financial struggles, a gift from a grateful client. The way he seemed to know more about my schedule than I'd told him. He was just paying attention because he cared. The questions about my insurance policies and investment accounts. He wanted to make sure I was financially secure. 3 months after our wedding, I started noticing changes in Marcus that should have terrified me. He became obsessed with my health, constantly suggesting doctor visits for minor ailments. When I caught a simple cold, he insisted I see a specialist. A minor cut on my hand led to urgent care visits and infection screenings. At first, I thought he was just worried about me. I had no idea he was building a medical history for future use. "You work too hard, baby," he'd say, massaging my shoulders after long days. "All this stress isn't good for your body. You need to take better care of yourself." Then he'd launch into detailed discussions about various health conditions, their symptoms, their treatments. I thought he was being caring. I didn't realize he was educating himself. The insurance policy changes started 6 months into our marriage. Marcus convinced me to increase my coverage, to add riders for various conditions, to ensure I was properly protected. He handled all the paperwork, met with the agents, made sure everything was filed correctly. I was grateful for his help. Insurance was tedious, and I trusted him to handle the details. "I just want to make sure you're covered for anything," he'd explain when I questioned the extensive coverage. "Medical costs are astronomical these days. This way, if anything happens, we won't have to worry about money while you're recovering." The life insurance policy was his masterpiece of manipulation. $2 million with him as the sole beneficiary. When I hesitated, he made it about love and commitment. "It's not about the money," he'd insisted. His voice hurt and sincere. "It's about knowing that if something happened to you, I'd be able to honor your memory properly. To not have to worry about practical things while I'm grieving. Don't you want that peace of mind for me?" I signed because I loved him, because I trusted him, because I couldn't imagine that the man sharing my bed every night was calculating my worth in dollars and cents. The first episode happened 8 months after our wedding. I woke up violently ill, vomiting and dizzy, convinced I had food poisoning. Marcus was immediately at my side, timing my symptoms, taking my temperature, insisting we go to the emergency room. "Better safe than sorry," he'd said, helping me to the car. "These things can escalate quickly." The doctors ran tests, found nothing conclusive, and sent me home with instructions to rest and stay hydrated. Marcus was attentive and caring throughout, never leaving my side, documenting everything for future reference. What I didn't know was that he'd slipped a mild emetic into my coffee that morning, just enough to create symptoms that would require medical attention, not enough to cause real harm. The hospital visit wasn't about my health. It was about establishing a pattern in my medical records. The episodes became more frequent over the next year. Mysterious stomach pains that sent us to urgent care. Dizzy spells that required neurology consultations. Chest pains that led to cardiac workups. Each incident was minor enough to be dismissed as stress or lifestyle factors, but together they painted a picture of a woman with increasingly complex health issues. Marcus played the devoted husband perfectly. He took detailed notes at every appointment, asked thoughtful questions about my symptoms, and ensured that every test and scan was properly documented. He built relationships with the medical staff, positioning himself as the caring spouse who just wanted the best for his wife. "You're so lucky to have him," nurses would tell me as Marcus fussed over my pillows or brought me ice chips. "He's so attentive. You can tell he really loves you." I felt lucky too. In a world where many spouses checked out during medical crises, I had a husband who was present for every appointment, every test, every result. I had no idea he was orchestrating most of my symptoms and planning for the day when my medical history would become valuable to the right buyers. The real breakthrough in Marcus's plan came when he connected with Dr. Harrison Webb, a surgeon, who'd had his license suspended for performing unnecessary procedures. Webb had been forced out of mainstream medicine, but hadn't given up on making money from his surgical skills. He'd gone underground, offering services to people who couldn't or wouldn't go through official channels. Marcus met Webb at a medical device conference, recognizing a kindred spirit in the disgraced surgeon's bitter complaints about regulatory overreach and missed opportunities. Over expensive drinks, they discovered they shared a similar philosophy. There was money to be made in medicine if you were willing to be creative about ethics. Webb's network was extensive and completely illegal. He'd connected desperate patients with black market organs for years, taking substantial cuts from both buyers and sellers. But he'd also identified a more lucrative angle: healthy organs from people who wouldn't be missed, or whose disappearance could be explained by medical complications. The profit margins are incredible, Webb had explained to Marcus during one of their clandestine meetings. A healthy liver can bring in $500,000. Kidneys, corneas, even skin grafts. There's a market for everything. The trick is finding the right donors and the right circumstances. Marcus had found both in me. The plan they developed was sophisticated and terrifying in its simplicity. Marcus would continue documenting my medical issues, building a case for increasingly complex treatments. Eventually, he'd manufacture a crisis serious enough to require emergency surgery. During that surgery, performed by Webb or one of his associates, they'd harvest whatever organs were most valuable, then claim I'd died from surgical complications. The insurance money would be substantial, but the organ sales would be where the real profit lay. A young, healthy woman with no history of substance abuse was worth more dead than alive to the right buyers. Marcus had already identified several potential clients through Webb's network, including a tech billionaire in Silicon Valley who'd been waiting 2 years for a compatible liver. What Marcus didn't account for was chance. Pure, random chance that would destroy his carefully laid plans and expose him in the most poetic way possible. The appendicitis attack that brought me to St. Mary's Hospital that Tuesday night was real, one of the few genuine medical emergencies I'd experienced in our marriage. The pain had started during dinner, sharp and sudden, doubling me over at our kitchen table. Hospital? I'd gasped, clutching my side. Something's wrong. Marcus's eyes had lit up with an excitement he tried to mask as concern. This was it. The opportunity he'd been orchestrating for months. A legitimate medical emergency that could provide the perfect cover for his plans. "I'll drive," he'd said, already reaching for his phone. But he wasn't calling for an ambulance or alerting the hospital. He was texting Webb, "It's happening, tonight." During the 20-minute drive to St. Mary's, Marcus was already working his network. Phone calls to Webb's associates, texts to the organ buyers who'd been placed on standby, messages to the cleanup crew who would handle the aftermath. By the time we reached the emergency room, the machinery of my murder was already in motion. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Dr. Rebecca Chen, the surgeon on call that night, was my estranged sister. Rebecca and I hadn't spoken in 3 years. Our last conversation had been a screaming match about our parents' estate, both of us saying things we couldn't take back. She'd accused me of abandoning the family for money. I'd accused her of thinking she was better than everyone else because she was a doctor. We'd both been grieving and angry, and instead of supporting each other, we'd destroyed what was left of our relationship. But blood is blood, and when Rebecca saw my name on the patient intake form, everything else stopped mattering. She'd been in the middle of reviewing surgical schedules when the alert came through. Emergency appendectomy, patient, Sarah Chen, age 31, insurance, private. The name had made her pause, her heart skipping a beat as she wondered if it could possibly be the sister she'd thought about every day for 3 years. When she saw me being wheeled into the emergency room, pale and writhing in pain, professional, training took over. The hurt and anger of our estrangement became irrelevant. I was her patient now, and more importantly, I was her little sister who needed help. Marcus, focused on his phone and his plans, didn't pay attention to the medical staff moving around us. He was too busy coordinating the final details of his scheme to notice that the surgeon preparing to operate on his wife was studying him with the sharp, analytical gaze of someone who'd spent years learning to read people. Rebecca had always been perceptive. It was what made her a good surgeon. She noticed details others missed, patterns that didn't quite fit, behaviors that seemed off. And as she watched Marcus pace the waiting room while I was being prepped for surgery, making hushed phone calls and checking his watch constantly, she felt something was wrong. "Mrs. Chen is being prepped now," she told Marcus, her voice professionally, neutral. "The appendectomy should take about an hour. You can wait here, or there's a family room down the hall if you'd prefer more privacy." Marcus had chosen privacy, which turned out to be the perfect decision for Rebecca's purposes. The family room had better acoustics for recording conversations, and fewer people around to witness whatever Marcus was planning. It was there, in that quiet room meant for families to comfort each other during medical crises, that Marcus made the phone calls that would destroy him. "She's in surgery now," he whispered into his phone, his back turned to the door. "How long do you need to get here?" Rebecca, making her rounds before surgery, had paused outside the room when she heard the urgency in his voice. Something about his tone, excited rather than worried, made her linger. 2 hours max," Marcus continued, "but it needs to look natural. Complications during surgery, you know? And make sure you bring the preservation equipment. I've got buyers lined up for everything." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She pressed herself against the wall outside the room, her mind racing as she processed what she was hearing. Her sister's husband, the man she'd trusted with Sarah's emergency contact information, was planning to sell her organs. "The liver's already spoken for," Marcus was saying. "Tech guy in California, paying $800,000. The kidneys will go to that clinic in Mexico. They've got cash buyers waiting. Even the corneas are worth something." Rebecca's medical training kicked in, pushing past the emotional shock to focus on what needed to be done. She pulled out her phone, opening the voice recording app, and positioned herself where she could capture every word of Marcus's conversation. "Just make sure it's clean," Marcus continued. "I can't have anyone questioning the death. The insurance company will investigate if anything seems suspicious, and I need that $2 million payout to be processed without issues. $2 million. Rebecca's mind reeled. Not only was Marcus planning to murder her sister for her organs, but he'd taken out a massive life insurance policy on her. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a long-term plan that had been months or years in the making. "The surgeon's some woman named Chen," Marcus said, and Rebecca's blood ran cold. "Probably foreign, won't ask too many questions. These immigrant doctors are usually just grateful to have jobs." The casual racism in his voice made Rebecca's hands shake with rage, but she forced herself to keep recording. Every word was evidence. Every admission was another nail in his coffin. "Yeah, I know it's risky," Marcus continued, "but I've been setting this up for 2 years. Her medical history shows pattern of complications, and I've been documenting everything. If she dies during surgery, it'll just be another case of young woman with undiagnosed health issues. Tragic, but not suspicious." Rebecca had heard enough. She ended the recording and immediately sent it to 3 people: the hospital security chief, the police, and her own lawyer. Then she did what surgeons do best. She prepared to save a life, but first, she had to ensure that Marcus's co-conspirators wouldn't be able to interfere with the surgery. She called security and had them quietly lock down the surgical floor. No unauthorized personnel would be allowed access, and Marcus would be politely but firmly kept in the waiting area until further notice. Then she scrubbed in for the most important surgery of her career. As I lay unconscious on the operating table, Rebecca worked with precision and fury. The appendectomy was straightforward. My appendix was inflamed but hadn't ruptured, making the procedure routine despite the emergency circumstances. But Rebecca treated it like the most delicate operation of her career, because she knew that someone was counting on my death. With each careful incision, each precise movement, she was not just removing a diseased organ, she was saving her sister from a husband who'd planned to dismember her for profit. The irony wasn't lost on her that Marcus had chosen St. Mary's Hospital specifically because he thought the staff would be easy to manipulate or intimidate. Instead, he'd delivered his victim directly into the hands of the one person who would fight hardest to protect her. The surgery took exactly 57 minutes. Rebecca emerged from the operating room to find Marcus pacing frantically in the waiting area, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried to explain to someone why his timeline was falling apart. "She's not dead yet," he was hissing into the phone. "The surgery took longer than expected. No, I can't go in there and check. Security's everywhere tonight." Rebecca approached him with the calm, professional demeanor that had served her well through years of delivering difficult news to families. "Mr. Chen?" Marcus spun around, his face a mask of false concern. "Doctor, how is she? Is Sarah okay?" "Your wife is fine," Rebecca said, watching his face carefully. "The appendectomy was successful. She's in recovery now and should wake up within the hour." The disappointment that flashed across Marcus's features before he could control it told Rebecca everything she needed to know about his true feelings. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the cold calculation beneath his concerned husband act. "That's wonderful news," he said, but his voice lacked any genuine relief. "When can I see her?" "Soon," Rebecca replied. "But first, we need to discuss some concerns that arose during her treatment." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Concerns? What kind of concerns?" Rebecca smiled, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, protecting her family from those who would harm them. "The kind that require police involvement," she said calmly, just as hospital security and 2 uniformed officers entered the waiting room behind her. "Mr. Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The look of shock and terror on Marcus's face as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists was the first moment of justice in a story that was just beginning to unfold. As they read him his rights, Rebecca thought about her sister lying in recovery, safe and alive despite her husband's best efforts. The real reckoning was only just starting, but Rebecca had already won the most important battle. She'd saved Sarah's life. Everything that came next would be about making sure Marcus and his accomplices paid for what they'd tried to do. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence, Rebecca headed back to recovery to wait for her sister to wake up. There would be difficult conversations ahead, painful revelations, and a long road to justice. But for now, the most important thing was that Sarah was alive. The perfect storm Marcus had planned had indeed arrived, just not in the way he'd expected. And at the center of it all was a sister's love, stronger than years of estrangement and more powerful than any scheme built on greed and betrayal. The first thing I noticed when consciousness slowly crept back was the familiar antiseptic smell of hospitals, followed by the dull ache in my abdomen where they'd removed my appendix. The second thing I noticed was the warm hand holding mine, a hand I hadn't felt in 3 years but would recognize anywhere. "Rebecca?" My voice came out as a hoarse whisper, my throat dry from the anesthesia. "I'm here, Sarah." Her voice was soft, professional, but I could hear something else underneath. Relief, maybe even tears. "How are you feeling?" I tried to sit up, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through my side. "Like I've been hit by a truck." "What happened? Where's Marcus? Is he—" "Sarah." Rebecca's voice cut through my questions with the same authority she'd used when we were children, and she needed me to listen to something important. "We need to talk. About Marcus. About what happened tonight." Something in her tone made my stomach clench with more than just post-surgical pain. I looked around the recovery room, noting for the first time that we were alone. No Marcus pacing anxiously by my bedside, no flowers or concerned husband energy that should have accompanied a medical emergency. "Where is my husband?" I asked again, this time with growing unease. Rebecca pulled her chair closer to my bed, her expression serious in that way that meant she was about to deliver bad news. In her surgical scrubs, with her hair pulled back, in the same tight ponytail she'd worn since medical school, she looked exactly like our father had when he'd sat us down to explain that our mother was sick. "Sarah," Marcus has been arrested. The words hit me like a physical blow. Arrested? For what? There must be some mistake. There's no mistake. Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. I need you to listen to me carefully, okay? What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but you need to know the truth. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. I'm going to play you a recording. This is Marcus, speaking on the phone while you were in surgery tonight. The blood drained from my face as I listened to my husband's voice discussing my organs like commodities, calculating their market value, arranging for my murder to look like surgical complications. Each word was a knife twisting in my chest, destroying everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my safety. The liver's already spoken for. Tech guy in California, paying $800,000. I pressed my hand to my mouth, fighting the nausea that had nothing to do with anesthesia. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be the man who brought me coffee every morning, who rubbed my feet after long days, who had held me while I cried about missing our parents. 2 years, I whispered when the recording ended. He said he'd been planning this for 2 years. Rebecca nodded grimly. The police are investigating the full timeline, but based on what they've found so far, it goes back even further. Sarah, I think he targeted you from the beginning. The room seemed to spin around me. Targeted me? The medical episodes you've been having. The stomach problems, the dizzy spells, the chest pains that kept sending you to doctors. The police found evidence that Marcus was causing them. He was systematically poisoning you with small doses of various substances, building a medical history that would make your death during surgery seem plausible. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of the betrayal. He was poisoning me? Mild emetics, blood pressure medications, even small amounts of Digitalis to cause heart palpitations. Nothing that would cause permanent damage, but enough to create symptoms that required medical attention. He was essentially creating a paper trail that would support the narrative of a young woman with unexplained health issues who died during routine surgery. The IV line in my arm suddenly felt like a lifeline to reality. Without it, I might have floated away entirely, unable to anchor myself to a world where my husband of 3 years had been slowly poisoning me while planning to sell my organs. The insurance policies, I said suddenly, fragments of memory clicking into place. He kept insisting we needed more coverage. Life insurance, disability, medical. $2 million in life insurance with him as the sole beneficiary, Rebecca confirmed. Plus substantial medical coverage that would have paid for the surgery and hospitalization without raising questions about costs. I closed my eyes, trying to reconcile the man I'd loved with the monster Rebecca was describing. How did you know? How did you figure it out? For the first time since I'd woken up, Rebecca's professional composure cracked slightly. I was your surgeon tonight, Sarah, when I saw your name on the patient list. I've thought about you every day for 3 years. When I heard Marcus making those phone calls, planning to have you killed for your organs. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. I couldn't let that happen to you. The irony wasn't lost on me. The sister I'd been too proud to speak to for 3 years had been the one to save my life. While I'd been isolated and vulnerable, manipulated by a husband who saw me as a collection of valuable parts, Rebecca had been there when I needed her most. The people he was working with, I said, my mind starting to work through the implications. The buyers, the other doctors, are they going to be arrested too? The FBI is involved now, Rebecca said. This isn't just about Marcus. They've uncovered an entire network of illegal organ trafficking. Marcus was apparently just one of several people recruiting. Donors. The word donors made my skin crawl. You mean victims? Yes, victims. Rebecca's jaw tightened. The man Marcus was working with, Dr. Harrison Webb, has been operating an underground organ harvesting ring for years. They've been targeting people like you, young, healthy, isolated individuals with substantial insurance coverage. A new wave of nausea hit me as I realized how carefully I'd been selected. Isolated, I repeated. He encouraged me to stay away from you, from the rest of the family. He made it seem like he was protecting me from painful relationships. Classic predator behavior, Rebecca said. Isolate the victim from their support system, make them dependent on the abuser for emotional and financial security, then exploit that dependency. I thought about all the times Marcus had subtly discouraged me from reconnecting with Rebecca. How he'd made sympathetic noises about family trauma while simultaneously reinforcing the idea that I was better off without those toxic relationships. How he'd positioned himself as my only real family, the only person who truly understood and cared about me. There's more, Rebecca said carefully. The police searched your house tonight. They found extensive documentation about you. Medical records, insurance policies, even photographs of you sleeping that appear to have been taken without your knowledge. The violation of that revelation made me feel sick. He was documenting me like livestock. Sarah. Rebecca's voice was firm, pulling me back from the spiral of horror I was falling into. You survived, you're alive, and he's never going to hurt you again. The police have everything they need to put him away for a very long time. I tried to focus on her words, on the fact that I was safe, but my mind kept circling back to the betrayal. I loved him, I whispered. I actually loved him. How could I have been so stupid? You weren't stupid, Rebecca said fiercely. You were targeted by someone who specializes in manipulation. Marcus isn't just a criminal. He's a sophisticated predator who spent years learning how to exploit women like you. This isn't your fault. A knock on the door interrupted us. Detective Maria Santos entered, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much but still cared about justice. Mrs. Chen, I'm Detective Santos. I'm sorry to bother you while you're recovering, but I need to ask you some questions about your husband and your recent medical history. Over the next hour, Detective Santos walked me through months of memories, helping me identify patterns I'd missed while living through them. The way Marcus had always been present for my medical appointments, taking notes and asking detailed questions. How he'd suggested specific doctors and specialists, steering me toward practitioners who were either incompetent or potentially corruptible. Dr. Webb's network included several legitimate medical professionals who were willing to look the other way for the right price, Detective Santos explained. Your husband was building relationships with people who could manipulate your care, if needed. The questioning was exhausting, forcing me to relive months of manipulation and gaslighting. But with each answer, I could see the case against Marcus becoming stronger. Every detail I provided was another link in the chain that would keep him locked away. What happens now? I asked when Detective Santos closed her notebook. Marcus is being held without bail on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and assault with a deadly weapon, the poisoning, she said. Dr. Webb and 3 of his associates were arrested tonight when they showed up at the hospital expecting to collect your organs. The FBI is working on dismantling the entire network. After Detective Santos left, Rebecca and I sat in silence for a while. The weight of everything that had happened was settling over me like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. I need to call my lawyer, I said finally. Divorce papers, restraining orders, all of it. Already handled, Rebecca said, and something in her tone made me look at her sharply. What do you mean already handled? She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I may have taken some liberties while you were unconscious. As your emergency contact and closest blood relative, I had certain legal authorities. I contacted your lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, right? And explained the situation. She's already filed emergency motions for divorce and restraining orders, and she's frozen all joint accounts pending investigation. I stared at my sister, a mix of gratitude and amazement washing over me. You did all that while I was in surgery? I also called your office and spoke to your assistant, She's handling your client meetings for the rest of the week, and your boss is aware of the situation. Confidentially, of course. For the first time since waking up, I felt something other than horror and betrayal. I felt protected, cared for. It had been so long since someone had anticipated my needs and acted in my best interests without expecting something in return. "Rebecca," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry. About the fight. About staying away. About—" "Don't," she said firmly. We were both grieving, both hurt, both too proud to make the first move. What matters is that we're here now. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Besides, if we hadn't been estranged, you might have told Marcus about my job here. And if he'd known his wife's sister was the surgeon on duty, the implication hung between us. If Marcus had known Rebecca would be operating on me, he might have chosen a different hospital, a different surgeon who wouldn't have cared enough to listen to his phone calls or act on suspicions. So our stubbornness accidentally saved my life," I said with a weak laugh. "Something like that." A new thought occurred to me, and with it came a fresh wave of anger. The other women. Detective Santos mentioned that Marcus's network had other victims. Were they— Rebecca's expression darkened. "The FBI is still investigating, but they've identified at least 6 suspicious deaths over the past 3 years. Young women, all married to men with connections to Dr. Webb's network, all of whom died during routine surgeries with their organs subsequently donated to private patients. 6 women. 6 lives cut short by husbands they'd trusted, by a medical system that was supposed to protect them. The magnitude of the conspiracy was staggering." "Their families," I said. "Do they know?" "The FBI is reopening those cases. Exhuming bodies, reinvestigating the deaths, building cases against the men who killed them." Rebecca's voice was hard. "Your survival, your testimony, it's going to bring justice for those women too." The responsibility of that felt overwhelming. I was alive not just by chance, but by the intersection of multiple coincidences. My estrangement from Rebecca, her job at St. Mary's, her decision to listen at Marcus's door. Other women hadn't been so lucky. "I want to help," I said. "With the investigation, with the other cases. Whatever it takes to make sure these men pay for what they've done." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "I thought you'd say that." Detective Santos left her card. She said the FBI would want to debrief you extensively once you're physically recovered. I looked down at the bandages covering my incision, evidence of the surgery that should have been my death sentence but had instead become my salvation. The appendix they'd removed was healthy tissue, excised to save my life. But if Marcus had succeeded, every organ in my body would have been harvested for profit. "I keep thinking about those 6 women," I said. "About their last moments, whether they knew what was happening." "Don't," Rebecca said sharply. "Don't torture yourself with those thoughts. Focus on the fact that you're alive, that justice is being served, that no other women will die because of this network." She was right, but survivor's guilt was already taking root in my chest. Why had I lived when they died? What made me special, beyond the coincidence of having a surgeon for a sister? "Sarah," Rebecca said, reading my expression, "you survived because you were smart enough to marry someone with your last name, stupid enough to fight with your sister for 3 years, and lucky enough to need an appendectomy on my shift. Sometimes survival is just random chance combined with the love of people who refuse to let you go." Her words hit me harder than any of the revelations about Marcus. Rebecca had refused to let me go, even when I'd pushed her away. Even when pride and grief had made us strangers, she'd still been there when I needed her most. "What now?" I asked. "I mean, after all the legal stuff is handled, after Marcus is convicted and the network is dismantled, what do I do with my life now?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering. "You rebuild," she said finally. "You take back the life Marcus tried to steal from you. You reconnect with the people who love you. You use your experience to help other victims. It sounded overwhelming, the idea of rebuilding an entire life from scratch. Everything I'd thought I knew about my marriage, my home, my safety, had been revealed as illusion. I felt like I was starting over from nothing. "One day at a time," Rebecca said, as if reading my thoughts. "And you won't be doing it alone. I'm not going anywhere this time." The promise in her voice was worth more than any insurance policy Marcus had taken out on my life. It was the promise of real family, real protection, real love that didn't come with a price tag. A nurse appeared in the doorway, checking her watch. "Visiting hours are ending soon," she said apologetically. Rebecca stood, but I grabbed her hand. "Don't go yet, please." "I'm not going far," she assured me. "I'm staying in the hospital tonight. I'll be here when you wake up tomorrow." After she left, I lay alone in the dark recovery room, processing everything that had happened. In less than 12 hours, my life had been completely upended. I'd gone from being a happily married woman with minor health concerns to a widow, well, almost widow, who'd discovered her husband was planning to murder her. But I was alive. Against all odds, despite Marcus's careful planning and extensive network, I was breathing, thinking, feeling. The man who'd seen me as nothing more than a collection of valuable organs was sitting in a jail cell, while I was planning my future. The future felt uncertain and scary, but it was mine. For the first time in 3 years, my life belonged to me again. Marcus's plan had failed spectacularly, undone by the very family bonds he'd tried to sever. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was of Rebecca's hand in mine, warm and real and protective. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more revelations, more difficult truths to face. But tonight, I was safe, surrounded by the kind of love that couldn't be bought or sold or harvested. Marcus had tried to turn me into profit margins and black market commodities. Instead, he'd given me back the sister I thought I'd lost forever. In trying to destroy my life, he'd accidentally shown me what was truly worth living for. 3 days after my surgery, I was sitting in a secure conference room at the FBI field office, staring at a wall covered with photographs and connecting strings that looked like something from a crime thriller. Except this was my life spread across that board, my face, my medical records, my home, all connected by red string to a web of criminals I'd never known existed. Special Agent David Richardson adjusted his glasses as he pointed to various photos. "What we've uncovered, Mrs. Chen, goes far beyond your husband's individual actions. We're looking at a sophisticated criminal enterprise that's been operating for at least 5 years. Rebecca sat beside me, having taken leave from the hospital, to help me navigate this nightmare. Her presence was the only thing keeping me grounded, as Agent Richardson explained how my marriage had been part of a larger hunting operation. "Marcus wasn't just your husband," Agent Richardson continued. "He was what we call a procurement specialist for Dr. Webb's organization. His job was to identify, court, and marry potential victims, then set up the circumstances for their harvesting." Clinical language made my skin crawl. Procurement. Harvesting. As if I were livestock instead of a human being. "How many others?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Agent Richardson flipped through his file. "We've identified 12 women who were married to men connected to Webb's network over the past 5 years. 6 died during routine surgeries. 4 are still alive, though we believe they're currently being prepared for harvesting. 2 others..." He paused. 2 others appear to have caught on to their husbands' plans and disappeared. We're still trying to locate them. 12 women. 12 lives destroyed by men who'd vowed to love and protect them. I thought about my wedding day, how happy I'd been, how safe I'd felt promising to love Marcus until death do us part. He'd probably been calculating my organ values while I spoke my vows. The 4 who are still alive, Rebecca interjected. Are they safe? We moved on all of them simultaneously when we arrested Marcus, Agent Richardson confirmed. They're in protective custody while we build cases against their husbands. None of them had any idea what was being planned. Agent Richardson pulled out a thick folder and placed it in front of me. Sarah, what I'm about to show you is going to be difficult, but we need you to understand the full scope of what Marcus was involved in. The folder contained Marcus's real records, not the charming medical device salesman persona he'd presented to me, but his actual criminal history. Multiple identities, previous marriages that had ended in suspicious deaths, connections to organ trafficking rings across 3 states. Marcus Chen isn't his real name, Agent Richardson said. His birth name is Michael Torres. He's 38, not 34 like he told you. He's been married 4 times under different identities. 2 of those wives died during surgeries, 1 disappeared, and 1 divorced him before he could implement his plan. I stared at a photograph of Marcus, Michael, with a completely different woman, both of them smiling at what appeared to be a wedding reception. The woman was young, blonde, laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. According to the file, she'd died 6 months later during what was supposed to be minor gallbladder surgery. Jennifer Walsh, I read from the caption. Age 29, died from complications during laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Dr. Webb performed that surgery, Agent Richardson said quietly. Jennifer's organs were harvested and sold to 4 different buyers. Her husband, Marcus, going by the name David Walsh at the time, collected a $1.8 million insurance payout. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages. Sarah Martinez, 31, died during appendectomy. Lisa Thompson, 28, died during hernia repair. Each woman's photo showed a bright, happy person who'd trusted the wrong man with her life. The pattern is always the same, Agent Richardson explained. Marcus targets successful, isolated women. He courts them for months, sometimes years, learning their habits, their medical history, their financial situation. He encourages them to cut ties with family and friends, making them dependent on him emotionally and socially. I thought about how systematically Marcus had isolated me from Rebecca, from my few remaining friends, from anyone who might have questioned his behavior or noticed the changes in my health. Then he begins the preparation phase. Agent Richardson continued. Subtle poisoning to create a medical history that will justify surgical intervention. Insurance policy changes to maximize the payout. Building relationships with corruptible medical professionals who can facilitate the harvesting. The medical professionals, Rebecca said, her voice tight with anger. How many doctors are involved in this? Agent Richardson consulted another file. We've identified at least 15 medical professionals connected to Webb's network. Surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses, even coroners who falsified death certificates. Some were paid accomplices, others were blackmailed into cooperation, the scope of the corruption was staggering. This wasn't just about one rogue doctor. It was an entire parallel medical system designed to harvest and sell human organs for profit. Webb's network had clients all over the world, Agent Richardson said, pulling out another set of photographs. Wealthy individuals who needed transplants but didn't want to wait for legitimate organ matching. Tech executives, foreign politicians, celebrities who could pay premium prices for healthy organs from young donors. He showed me photographs of luxury medical facilities that looked more like high-end spas than hospitals. These are Webb's harvesting centers, off-the-book surgical. Suites where the harvesting took place. They're equipped with state-of-the-art preservation equipment and staffed by medical professionals who'd lost their licenses or were willing to work outside the law for the right price. I felt sick thinking about how close I'd come to ending. Up in one of those sterile rooms, my life reduced to a series of profitable transactions. The financial records are what really tell the story, Agent Richardson said, opening a laptop and showing me spreadsheets that reduced human lives to profit. Margins. A complete harvesting, liver, kidneys, heart, corneas, skin, even bone marrow, could bring in upwards of $2 million in organ sales, plus whatever insurance payout the husband could collect. $2 million. The same amount Marcus had, insured my life for. I was literally worth more dead than alive to him. Sarah, Agent Richardson said gently, I need to ask you about some specific incidents from your marriage. We're trying to establish a timeline of when Marcus began preparing you for harvesting. Over the next 2 hours, we went through my medical history month by month. Agent Richardson had Marcus's notes, actual written documentation of how he'd been systematically poisoning me and manipulating my health. February 15th, I read from Marcus's handwriting. Administered 10 milligrams Ipecac in morning coffee. Vomiting began within 20 minutes. Took S to urgent care. Established stomach sensitivity. In medical records. Each entry was a betrayal documented in Marcus's neat handwriting. My husband had been keeping a scientific log of how he was slowly destroying my health, noting my symptoms, tracking my doctor visits, calculating the best times to escalate my conditions. March 8th. Digitalis in evening wine caused heart palpitations. S reported chest pain, went to ER. Cardiac workup showed irregular rhythm. Cardiologist recommended follow-up. Building case for underlying cardiac issues. I remembered that night clearly. I'd been so scared, convinced I was having a heart attack at 31. Marcus had been so calm, so reassuring, holding my hand while the doctors ran tests. I'd felt so grateful to have such a supportive husband during a medical crisis. He documented everything, I said, flipping through pages of careful notes. My reactions, my symptoms, even my emotional responses to the medical scares. Classic predator behavior, Agent Richardson confirmed. Marcus was incredibly methodical. He understood that creating a convincing medical history required time and careful documentation. If he'd succeeded, your death would have seemed like the tragic but logical conclusion to months of health problems. Rebecca was reading over my shoulder, her face growing paler with each entry. Some of these substances could have killed you, she said. The digitalis especially, if he'd miscalculated the dose. But he didn't want me to die from poisoning, I realized. He needed me alive and healthy for the harvesting. The poisoning was just about creating paperwork. Agent Richardson nodded grimly. Marcus was very careful to use substances that would cause alarming symptoms without permanent damage. He needed your organs to be in perfect condition when the time came. The laptop screen changed to show financial records, payments from Marcus to various medical professionals, purchases of drugs and medical equipment, even receipts for the luxury items he'd bought me during our courtship. He kept receipts for everything, Agent Richardson said, including the engagement ring, the flowers, the romantic dinners. He was treating your courtship like a business expense, which it essentially was. Every romantic gesture, every thoughtful gift, every moment of seeming love and care had been calculated and documented as an investment in my eventual murder. The man I'd thought was wooing me had actually been grooming me for slaughter. There's something else, Agent Richardson said, his tone becoming even more serious. Marcus wasn't just working with Dr. Webb. He was being supervised by someone higher up in the organization, someone who's been running this operation for years. He showed me a photograph of a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed, with the kind of refined appearance that suggested money and education. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Agent Richardson said. Former transplant surgeon. Lost her license 10 years ago for performing unnecessary surgeries. She's the one who recruited Marcus and trained him in victim selection and preparation. Dr. Vasquez looked like someone's grandmother, not the mastermind of an organ trafficking ring. But her eyes were cold, calculating, the kind of eyes that could look at a human being and see only profit potential. She runs a matchmaking service, Agent Richardson continued. High-end, exclusive, supposedly for successful professionals looking for long-term relationships. But it's actually a front for recruiting both victims and perpetrators for the organ harvesting operation. My blood ran cold. The matchmaking service. Marcus said he met me at a medical conference, but you met him at a networking mixer, sponsored by Elite Connections, Agent Richardson finished. Dr. Vasquez's company. You weren't randomly targeted, Sarah. You were specifically selected and served up to Marcus like a meal. The mixer had been elegant, professional, full of successful people in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. I'd thought I was just expanding my professional network when I'd signed up. Instead, I'd been walking into a hunting ground where predators shopped for victims. The company screens potential clients extensively, Agent Richardson explained. Financial background, health records, family connections, social support systems. They identify women who meet specific criteria, successful, healthy, isolated, and then introduce them to their male operatives. Elite Connections hadn't been trying to find me love. They'd been advertising my organs to potential buyers, with Marcus as the designated harvester who would court me, marry me, and eventually deliver my body parts to the highest bidders. How many others? Rebecca asked. How many women has this matchmaking service targeted? Agent Richardson's expression was grim. We're still investigating, but we've identified at least 30 women who used Elite Connections over the past 5 years. 12 ended up married to men connected to the organ trafficking network. Of those 12, 6 are dead, 4 were saved when we moved on the operation, and 2 are missing. 30 women who'd thought they were looking for love, who'd trusted a matchmaking service to find them compatible partners. Instead, they'd been evaluated like livestock and matched with men who planned to kill them. The 2 who are missing, I said. You think they figured it out? We're hoping so, Agent Richardson said. But it's also possible that their harvesting was handled differently. Some of Webb's clients preferred to have the extraction done in private facilities, overseas. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Those women might have been murdered in foreign countries, their organs harvested in facilities beyond U.S. jurisdiction, their bodies disposed of where they'd never be found. We need your help to bring down the entire network, Agent Richardson said, leaning forward. Marcus is talking, trying to cut a deal, but we need victim testimony to make the conspiracy charges stick. Your survival and your testimony could help us convict everyone involved. I looked at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. What do you need me to do? First, we need you to testify before the grand jury about Marcus's actions and their impact on your life. Second, we'd like you to participate in a controlled operation to help us identify other potential victims and gather evidence against Dr. Vasquez. The controlled operation, Agent Richardson explained, would involve me contacting Elite Connections as a satisfied client, providing testimonials that could help them identify other women who might be in danger. The FBI would monitor all communications and use my access to gather evidence about the company's screening and selection processes. It's not without risk, Agent Richardson warned. Dr. Vasquez is extremely intelligent and suspicious. If she realizes you survived and are working with law enforcement, she might accelerate operations against other current victims. But the alternative was letting the network continue to operate, letting other women walk unknowingly into the same trap that had nearly killed me. I'll do it, I said, surprising myself with how quickly the decision came. Whatever it takes to stop them. Rebecca squeezed my hand. I'll be with you every step of the way. Agent Richardson smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Good, because we're going to need all the help we can get. Dr. Vasquez has been operating for over a decade, and she's very good at covering her tracks, but she's never had to deal with a victim who survived and fought back. As we prepared to leave the FBI office, Agent Richardson handed me a secure phone and a detailed briefing packet. Study everything in here, he said. Tomorrow you're going to call Elite Connections and tell them how grateful you are for the wonderful man they introduced you to. You're going to help us save the lives of women who don't even know they're in danger yet. Walking out of the federal building, I felt a strange mix of terror and purpose. I was about to become bait in a trap designed to catch the people who'd tried to murder me. But for the first time since waking up in the hospital, I felt like I had some control over my situation. Marcus had seen me as a victim, a commodity, a collection of organs to be harvested and sold. Dr. Vasquez and her network had treated me like livestock to be processed for profit. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd underestimated the power of a woman who refuses to be anyone's victim. The network that had tried to destroy me was about to learn what happens when the prey fights back. The Elite Connections office was everything I'd expected from a high-end matchmaking service. Marble floors, fresh orchids, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered money rather than shouted it. Sitting in Dr. Elena Vasquez's waiting room, wearing a wire so sophisticated it was invisible even to trained eyes, I fought to keep my breathing steady as I prepared to face the woman who'd orchestrated my near murder. Mrs. Chen, the receptionist's voice was warm, professional. Dr. Vasquez will see you now. 3 weeks had passed since my meeting with the FBI. 3 weeks of intensive preparation, psychological coaching, and careful planning for this moment. The story I was about to tell was a masterpiece of deception. Sarah Chen, grateful client, visiting Elite Connections to thank them for introducing her to her wonderful husband Marcus, and to recommend their services to other successful women. She knew. Dr. Vasquez rose from behind an antique mahogany desk as I entered her office. She was smaller than I'd expected, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to assess everything they saw. Her handshake was firm, confident, and completely devoid of warmth. "Sarah," she said, her slight accent adding a sophisticated edge to her words. "How lovely to see you again. Though I confess, I was surprised to receive your call. Most of our successfully matched clients prefer to move on from our services once they've found their happiness." There was something in her tone, a subtle probing that made me glad for the hours of FBI coaching I'd received. Dr. Vasquez was fishing, trying to understand why a supposedly happily married woman would return to the matchmaking service that had introduced her to her husband. "That's exactly why I wanted to see you," I said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. "Marcus and I are so grateful for everything Elite Connections did for us. You changed our lives." Dr. Vasquez's smile was perfect, warm, professional, and utterly false. "I'm delighted to hear that. Marcus spoke very highly of you during our initial consultation. He was quite specific about the type of partner he was seeking." The words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to smile brighter. "He tells everyone how perfect your matching process is. The way you really understand what people need in a partner, not just what they think they want." "Understanding goes beyond surface compatibility," Dr. Vasquez agreed, her eyes never leaving my face. "We pride ourselves on deep psychological and lifestyle analysis. Tell me, how has married life been treating you? Any challenges adapting to shared living arrangements?" I launched into the performance I'd rehearsed dozens of times, painting a picture of marital bliss while carefully dropping the information the FBI needed Dr. Vasquez to hear. Marcus was attentive and caring, always looking out for my health and well-being. He'd encouraged me to get comprehensive medical insurance, to update my will, to make sure all my legal affairs were in order, responsible husband behavior that would seem perfectly normal to anyone who didn't know the sinister truth behind his suggestions. "How wonderful," Dr. Vasquez murmured, making notes on a tablet. "And your health? Marcus mentioned you'd been experiencing some minor issues. Nothing serious, I hope?" The question was delivered casually, but I could feel the weight behind it. Dr. Vasquez was checking on the preparation phase, confirming that Marcus had been successfully building the medical history that would justify my eventual death during surgery. "Oh, just minor things," I said with a dismissive wave. "Some stomach troubles, occasional dizziness. Marcus has been so sweet about making sure I see doctors for everything. He worries about me more than I worry about myself sometimes." Dr. Vasquez made another note, her expression pleased. "Attentive husbands are such a blessing. It's wonderful." when we find men who truly prioritize their wives' well-being. The casual evil of her words, discussing Marcus's care for my health when she knew he'd been systematically poisoning me, made my stomach clench. But I kept smiling, kept playing. The role of the naive wife who had no idea her husband was planning to harvest her organs. Actually, I said, leaning forward conspiratorially, that's partly why I wanted to see you today. I have several friends who are looking for the kind of deep, meaningful relationship Marcus and I have found. Successful women who are tired of surface-level dating and ready for real partnership. Dr. Vasquez's interest sharpened immediately. How intriguing. What kind of work do your friends do? I pulled out my phone, showing her photos of fictional friends that the FBI had created for this operation. Each friend was actually a female FBI agent, carefully chosen and prepared to infiltrate elite connections as potential victims. This is Jessica, I said, showing her a photo of Agent Maria Santos with lighter hair and casual clothes. She's a biotech executive, very successful but works incredibly long hours. She's been single for 3 years and is starting to worry. She'll never find someone who understands the demands of her career. Dr. Vasquez studied the photo intently. She's lovely. Health history? The question was asked so naturally that someone without my knowledge might not have caught its significance. But I knew Dr. Vasquez was already assessing Jessica's potential value as an organ donor. Excellent health, I replied. Runs marathons, never smokes, barely drinks. Jessica takes incredible care of herself. Probably better than she takes care of her personal relationships. And family connections? Dr. Vasquez asked, still maintaining the pretense that this was normal relationship consultation. Limited, I said, following the script the FBI had prepared. Her parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, no siblings, and she's so focused on work that she's lost touch with most of her college friends. She says she feels isolated sometimes, like she needs someone who can be her whole world. Perfect. Victim criteria, delivered with a smile. Healthy, wealthy, isolated, and vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Dr. Vasquez was practically salivating as she took detailed notes about Jessica's background. She sounds like exactly the type of accomplished woman we love to work with, Dr. Vasquez said. Our male clients appreciate partners who bring both success and depth to a relationship. I showed her photos of 2 more friends, additional FBI agents playing potential victims. Each had been carefully crafted to meet the profile of women the organ trafficking network targeted. Successful professionals with minimal family connections and substantial assets. I'd love to set up initial consultations for all 3, Dr. Vasquez said, her enthusiasm barely contained. Our intake process is quite thorough. We like to understand every aspect of our clients' lives to ensure the most compatible matches. That's wonderful, I said. Though I should mention they're all quite private about their personal lives. Jessica especially has trust issues after some bad experiences with men who seemed more interested in her money than her personality. Dr. Vasquez nodded sympathetically. We see that often with successful women. That's why our screening process for male clients is so rigorous. We only work with men who have proven themselves financially stable and emotionally mature. Financially stable and emotionally mature enough to systematically poison and murder their wives, apparently. The cognitive dissonance of sitting across from this monster while she spoke about protecting women was almost overwhelming. I'm curious, I said, trying to sound casual. How do you find such high-quality men? Marcus mentioned that Elite Connections has quite an exclusive male clientele. Dr. Vasquez's smile became slightly guarded. We have a very selective recruitment process. Many of our male clients come through professional referrals. Doctors, lawyers, executives who move in sophisticated circles. Men who understand the value of discretion and long-term commitment. Men like Marcus, who specialized in long-term commitment right up until the moment they harvested their wives' organs for profit. The consultation fees, I continued, are they the same for everyone? I want to make sure my friends are prepared for the investment. Our fees vary based on the level of service required, Dr. Vasquez explained. For clients with your friends' profiles, we typically recommend our Platinum package. It includes comprehensive background verification, psychological compatibility, testing, and ongoing relationship support throughout the courtship process. The Platinum package, I knew from FBI briefings, was code for victims who met optimal harvesting criteria. The ongoing relationship support would include monitoring the poisoning phase and timing the eventual surgery. That sounds perfect, I said. Should I have them call to schedule their initial consultations? Actually, Dr. Vasquez said, consulting her calendar, I have some time this afternoon. If any of your friends are available, I'd be happy to meet with them today. Sometimes spontaneous meetings yield the most authentic insights. My heart rate spiked. The FBI had prepared for this possibility, but having Dr. Vasquez want to meet the fake victims immediately put additional pressure on the operation. Agent Santos would need to be ready to play Jessica within hours, complete with a cover story, an emotional state consistent with a woman looking for love. Let me text them, I said, pulling out the special phone the FBI had given me. The text I sent was coded. VIP wants to meet today. Package delivery required immediately. Within minutes, I received responses from all 3 friends expressing excitement about potential same-day consultations. The FBI was moving fast to keep the operation on track. They're all available, I reported. Jessica can be here at 2, Amanda at 3:30, and Caroline at 5. Dr. Vasquez looked pleased. Excellent. This will give us time for proper individual assessments before we begin the matching process. As our meeting concluded, Dr. Vasquez walked me to the door with the same warm professionalism she'd shown throughout our conversation. To anyone watching, we were simply a satisfied client and a successful businesswoman discussing referrals. Thank you again for thinking of Elite Connections, she said, shaking my hand. I have a feeling your friends are going to be very happy with our services. I'm sure they will be, I replied. After all, you gave me Marcus. That's a gift I can never repay. Walking away from Elite Connections, I felt a mixture of triumph and revulsion. The performance had gone perfectly. Dr. Vasquez had taken the bait completely, already planning how to process my friends through her organ trafficking pipeline, but sitting across from the woman who'd orchestrated my attempted murder, listening to her speak about protecting women while planning their deaths, had been one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. I made it 3 blocks before I had to stop in an alley and throw up, the stress and horror of the situation finally overwhelming my carefully maintained composure. The wire I was wearing captured every sound, and I knew the FBI agents monitoring the operation would understand that I'd reached my emotional limit. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Richardson. Excellent work. Phase 1 complete. Report. To Safe House for debrief. The Safe House was a nondescript apartment building in downtown Chicago, chosen specifically for its multiple exit routes and sophisticated surveillance equipment. Rebecca was waiting when I arrived, her face tight with worry. How did it go? She asked, pulling me into a hug. She bought it completely, I said, finally allowing myself to relax. Dr. Vasquez is expecting to meet with 3 new victims this afternoon. She couldn't hide her excitement when I described their health profiles and isolation levels. Agent Richardson appeared from the monitoring room, followed by the 3 FBI agents who would be playing my fictional friends. Each had undergone dramatic appearance changes, new hair, colored contacts, even subtle makeup to alter their facial structure. The audio quality was excellent, Agent Richardson reported. We got clear admissions about the victim selection criteria, references to the Platinum package protocol, and confirmation that she's actively recruiting new targets. Agent Santos, now transformed into Jessica, was reviewing her cover story one final time. Tech executive, marathon runner, orphaned 5 years ago, isolated from former friends due to work demands, she recited, looking for deep emotional connection with financially stable partner. Remember, Agent Richardson cautioned all three agents. Dr. Vasquez is extremely intelligent and experienced at reading people. She'll be looking for any signs that you're not genuine victims. The psychological profiles need to be perfect. I watched as the agents prepared for their undercover roles, marveling at their transformation from law enforcement professionals to vulnerable women seeking love. Each had studied their character for weeks, developing authentic emotional responses and believable personal histories. "What's my role now?" I asked Agent Richardson. "You wait," he said, "and you prepare for the next phase. If today goes well, Dr. Vasquez will want to introduce your friends to potential matches very quickly. We need you ready to support their cover stories and react appropriately to whatever developments occur." The waiting was agony. I sat in the safe house monitoring room, listening through headphones as each of my friends met with Dr. Vasquez. The conversations followed predictable patterns: detailed questioning about health history, family connections, financial assets, and emotional vulnerabilities. Dr. Vasquez was masterful at her role, projecting warmth and understanding while systematically gathering information about how best to exploit each woman. She asked about insurance coverage with maternal concern, discussed family medical history as if planning genetic compatibility, and explored each woman's social support system under the guise of understanding their relationship needs. By evening, all three consultations were complete, and Dr. Vasquez had scheduled follow-up meetings for the next week. The FBI had successfully planted 3 agents inside Elite Connections' victim pipeline, with full access to their matching process and timeline. Phase 2 begins tomorrow, Agent Richardson announced as the team gathered for debrief. Dr. Vasquez will be reaching out to her male operatives, looking for matches for your 3 friends. We'll be monitoring all communications and documenting the selection criteria used for pairing victims with their intended killers. I thought about Marcus, sitting in his jail cell, probably still believing that his careful planning had only been undone by bad luck. He had no idea that his wife's survival was about to destroy an entire criminal network, or that the woman he'd tried to harvest for organs was now the architect of his organization's downfall. "There's something else," Agent Richardson said, his expression serious. "Our surveillance team has identified unusual activity around 2 other Elite Connections clients, women who were matched 6 months ago and appear to be in the late stages of preparation for harvesting." My blood ran cold. "They're in immediate danger?" "We believe so. Their husbands have been escalating the poisoning protocols, and both women have been scheduled for emergency surgeries within the next 2 weeks. Rebecca grabbed my hand. "We have to warn them." "We will," Agent Richardson assured us. "But we need to be careful not to compromise the larger operation. If we move too fast to protect those 2 women, we might lose our chance to gather evidence. Against the entire network, the ethical dilemma was crushing. 2 women were walking unknowingly toward their deaths while we gathered evidence to convict their would-be killers. Every day we waited to build a stronger case was another day those women were being poisoned by husbands they trusted. "How long?" I asked. "How long before we can move to save them?" Agent Richardson consulted his files. "If everything goes according to plan, we'll have enough evidence to arrest the entire network within 10 days. But if either woman's condition deteriorates faster than expected..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. We were in a race against time, gathering evidence while trying to prevent more murders. The weight of responsibility was enormous, not just for the 2 women currently in danger, but for all the future victims who would die if we failed to dismantle Elite Connections completely. As I left the safe house that evening, I looked back at the building where FBI agents were working around the clock to bring down the network that had tried to kill me. In 10 days, this nightmare would either be over, or more women would die because we hadn't moved fast enough. The honey trap was set, the bait had been taken, and the predators were circling. Now, we had to spring the trap without letting anyone else get caught in the killing machine Marcus and Dr. Vasquez had built. The emergency meeting was called at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, which told me everything I needed to know about how badly things were going wrong. Agent Richardson's voice was grim as he briefed the assembled team in the FBI safe house, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the pressure of what we'd discovered in the past 48 hours. "We have a problem," he announced, pointing to surveillance photos spread across the conference table. "Dr. Vasquez is accelerating her timeline. 2 of the women we've been monitoring, Laura Hendricks and Michelle Park, have been scheduled for emergency surgeries within the next 72 hours. I stared at the photographs of the 2 women, both younger than me, both smiling innocently in pictures that had been taken without their knowledge. Laura was a software engineer from Seattle, married 8 months ago to a man named David Chen, one of Marcus's aliases, I realized with horror. Michelle was a pharmaceutical researcher from Denver, married to Dr. Richard Webb, who I now knew was Dr. Harrison Webb's son and fellow organ trafficker. What triggered the acceleration?" Rebecca asked, leaning forward in her chair. She'd taken indefinite leave from the hospital to help with the operation, and the stress was showing in the dark circles under her eyes. Agent Richardson pulled up a series of intercepted communications on his laptop. "Our surveillance suggests that Dr. Vasquez suspects something is wrong. Phone calls between her and her operatives have increased dramatically, and they're using more coded language than usual." He played an audio file of Dr. Vasquez speaking to someone identified as David Chen, Marcus's latest identity. Her voice was sharp, urgent. "The timeline needs to move faster. There are too many variables in play right now. I want the Seattle package processed this week." The Seattle package? Laura Hendricks, reduced to shipping terminology by the woman planning her murder. Laura's husband has already told her that her recent blood work showed some concerning irregularities, Agent Richardson continued. He's convinced her she needs immediate surgery to remove what he's calling a suspicious mass near her liver. "But there is no mass," Rebecca said, her medical training making her voice tight with anger. "They're going to open her up and harvest her organs based on completely fabricated medical results." Agent Richardson nodded grimly. "The surgery is scheduled for Thursday morning at a private clinic outside Seattle. Dr. Webb himself will be performing the procedure, with 3 of his associates assisting." I felt sick thinking about Laura, probably spending these last few days terrified about her health, grateful to have a loving husband by her side during this medical crisis. She had no idea that the man comforting her fears was the same person, who'd been systematically poisoning her for months. "What about Michelle?" Agent Santos asked. "She'd been playing my friend Jessica for the past week, meeting with potential matches that Dr. Vasquez had arranged." "Similar situation," Agent Richardson replied, showing us Michelle's file. "She's been told she has a rare blood disorder that requires immediate intervention. Surgery is scheduled for Friday at a facility in Colorado. 2 women, 2 different states, 2 elaborate medical fabrications designed to justify their murders, and we had less than 3 days to save them both without destroying the larger investigation." "Options," Agent Richardson asked the room. "We could warn them directly," suggested Agent Martinez, who'd been playing my friend Amanda. "Anonymous tips, fake medical second opinions, anything to make them delay the surgeries." "Too risky," Agent Richardson replied. "If their husbands realize the women have been warned, they might disappear or accelerate to immediate termination. We could be signing their death warrants." "What about arresting the husbands on pretense charges?" Rebecca suggested. "Buy us time while we build the bigger case." "Same problem," Agent Richardson said. "If Dr. Vasquez realizes her operatives are being arrested, she'll shut down the entire network and disappear. We'll lose our chance to save future victims and prosecute the organization." The weight of the decision was crushing. We were being forced to choose between saving 2 women we could identify and protecting countless future victims who would die if the network simply relocated and continued operating. "There's a third option," I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind. "What if we don't warn the women but we make sure the surgeries fail?" Agent Richardson looked intrigued. "Explain." Both surgeries are happening at private clinics controlled by Dr. Webb's network, I said, standing to pace as I worked through the plan. What if we infiltrate the medical teams, plant our own people inside to sabotage the operations from within? Rebecca's eyes lit up. Medical emergency protocols. If something goes wrong during surgery, equipment failure, anesthesia complications, contamination alerts, the procedures would have to be stopped immediately. Agent Richardson was already making notes. We'd need medical professionals willing to go undercover. Surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses who could pass background checks and integrate into Webb's teams. I know people, Rebecca said immediately. Doctors who've worked with law enforcement before, people we can trust completely. If we can get them placed in those operating rooms, it's risky, Agent Richardson warned. If Webb or his associates realize they're dealing with federal agents during active surgeries, the undercover operatives could be killed along with the intended victims. But it was the only option that gave us a chance to save Laura and Michelle without compromising the larger investigation. Over the next 6 hours, Rebecca worked her medical contacts while the FBI coordinated the most complex undercover operation any of us had ever attempted. Dr. James Morrison, a trauma surgeon from Chicago and one of Rebecca's former colleagues, agreed to pose as a visiting specialist for Laura's surgery in Seattle. Dr. Sarah Kim, an anesthesiologist with military medical experience, would handle Michelle's case in Colorado. Both doctors understood they were walking into situations where they might have to choose between maintaining their cover and saving a patient's life. The plan is simple, Agent Richardson briefed the expanded team. Our doctors integrate into the surgical teams, then create believable medical emergencies that force the procedures to be stopped before any harvesting can occur. Equipment malfunctions, patient instability, contamination protocols, anything that makes continuing the surgery impossible. Meanwhile, Agent Santos received a call from Dr. Vasquez requesting an urgent meeting. Jessica was being fast-tracked for matching, with a consultation scheduled for Thursday afternoon, the same day as Laura's surgery. She's moving faster than expected, Agent Santos reported after the call. Dr. Vasquez wants to introduce me to someone she calls an exceptional gentleman who appreciates successful women? I felt a chill of recognition. That's exactly what she said about Marcus when she first introduced us. Word for word. The pattern was becoming clear. Dr. Vasquez had a script, a systematic approach to introducing victims to their future killers. The exceptional gentleman would be another Marcus, charming, attentive, perfectly calibrated to exploit Jessica's supposed vulnerabilities. Who's the target? Agent Richardson asked. Agent Santos consulted her notes. Someone calling himself Dr. Alexander Reed. Claims to be a plastic surgeon, recently divorced, looking for a meaningful relationship with an accomplished woman. The FBI's database search on Dr. Alexander Reed revealed the truth within hours. Real name, Anthony Ricci, 41, with a history of medical malpractice lawsuits and connections to underground cosmetic surgery operations. Like Marcus, he specialized in identifying and courting successful women before integrating them into Webb's harvesting network. He's killed at least 3 wives in the past 5 years, Agent Richardson reported. Each death was attributed to complications during cosmetic procedures he performed himself. The man is essentially a serial killer with a medical license. Agent Santos would be meeting with a man who'd perfected the art of murdering women while making it look like medical accidents. The stakes of maintaining her cover had just become life or death. Thursday morning arrived with the precision of a ticking bomb. At 6 a.m. Pacific time, Dr. Morrison was scrubbing in for Laura's surgery in Seattle, while Dr. Kim was preparing for Michelle's procedure in Colorado. Both doctors were wearing nearly invisible recording devices and had memorized detailed contingency plans for sabotaging the operations. I sat in the FBI monitoring station, listening to audio feeds from both locations while trying not to think about how many things could go wrong. Rebecca was beside me, her medical expertise helping the FBI team understand the surgical terminology and timing we were hearing. "Patient is prepped and ready," came Dr. Morrison's voice from Seattle. "Dr. Webb is reviewing the fabricated scans one more time. Laura's husband is in the waiting room, acting appropriately concerned." In Colorado, Dr. Kim's voice was equally professional. "Michelle is being wheeled into the OR now. Her husband just gave her a kiss goodbye and told her he loved her. If she only knew he was planning to sell her liver to pay off his gambling debts." The casual evil of it was staggering. These men could kiss their wives goodbye, comfort their fears, and hold their hands right up until the moment they planned to murder them for profit. "Beginning anesthesia administration," Dr. Kim reported from Colorado. "Patient is responding normally. Webb's son is setting up the organ preservation equipment. They're not even pretending this is a legitimate medical procedure." In Seattle, Dr. Morrison's report was similar. "Laura is under anesthesia. Dr. Webb is making his first incision. I'm positioned to monitor her vitals and intervene if necessary." The next hour was the longest of my life. I listened to the surgical procedures unfold, hearing the casual conversation between Dr. Webb and his associates as they prepared to commit murder. They discussed organ quality, buyer specifications, and preservation timelines while working on unconscious women who trusted them with their lives. "Something's wrong with the anesthesia equipment," Dr. Kim announced suddenly from Colorado. "Patient's vitals are becoming unstable. We need to stop immediately." Through the audio feed, I could hear alarms beeping, and Dr. Webb's son cursing as their carefully planned surgery was derailed by equipment failure. Dr. Kim had triggered the sabotage perfectly, creating a believable medical emergency that forced them to stop the procedure before any organs could be harvested. "Patient needs immediate stabilization," Dr. Kim continued. "We'll have to postpone the procedure until we can determine what caused the equipment malfunction." In Seattle, Dr. Morrison's sabotage was even more dramatic. "Contamination alert," he announced loudly. "Sterile field has been compromised. We have potential bacterial exposure. All personnel need to exit immediately." Dr. Webb's voice was furious. "That's impossible. We followed all protocols. I'm calling it." Dr. Morrison interrupted with the authority of a trauma surgeon. "Patient safety requires immediate termination of this procedure. We evacuate now." Both surgeries were stopped before any harvesting could occur. Laura and Michelle would wake up confused about why their procedures had been canceled, but they would wake up alive and intact. Our undercover doctors had successfully sabotaged 2 murders without blowing their covers. But our relief was short-lived. Within hours of the failed surgeries, Dr. Vasquez's communications became frantic. She knew something was wrong, and she was moving to protect her network. "Emergency protocols are in effect," Agent Richardson announced as intercepted calls flooded our monitoring systems. "Dr. Vasquez is ordering all active operations to accelerate immediately. Anyone in the preparation phase needs to be processed." Within 48 hours, the failed surgeries had spooked the entire network. Rather than making us safer, our successful rescue of Laura and Michelle had triggered a killing spree as Dr. Vasquez tried to harvest as many organs as possible before her operation was exposed. "How many women are in immediate danger?" Rebecca asked. Agent Richardson's face was pale as he reviewed the intelligence reports. "At least 8, possibly more. Dr. Vasquez has activated sleeper operatives across 5 states. They're all moving to emergency harvest protocols. 8 women who would die in the next 2 days unless we could stop an entire criminal network that was now operating in full crisis mode. The honey trap we'd set had worked too well. Instead of catching individual predators, we'd triggered a feeding frenzy that threatened to kill multiple victims simultaneously." "Options?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Agent Richardson was already coordinating with FBI field offices across the country. "We go full tactical. Simultaneous raids on all known network locations, emergency protective custody for all identified victims, and immediate arrests of every person connected to elite connections." It was the nuclear option, abandoning the careful investigation in favor of immediate action to save lives. We might lose some evidence, some criminals might escape, but at least the women currently in danger would survive. Jessica's meeting with Dr. Reed is in 4 hours, Agent Santos reminded us. Do I keep the appointment or pull out? The meeting with Dr. Reed represented our best chance to gather final evidence against Dr. Vasquez, but it also put Agent Santos directly in the path of a serial killer who would be operating under emergency protocols. Keep the appointment, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. But I'm going with you. Agent Richardson started to object, but I cut him off. Doctor, Vasquez trusts me. If I show up to support my friend Jessica during her first meeting with a potential match, it provides perfect cover and gives us 2 federal assets in the room instead of 1. It was dangerous, potentially suicidal, but it was also our last chance to gather the evidence needed to convict Dr. Vasquez of masterminding the entire operation. In 4 hours, I would be sitting across from a man who specialized in murdering women like me, trying to gather evidence while keeping us both alive. The next phase of our operation was about to begin, and this time, there would be no second chances. The restaurant Dr. Vasquez had chosen for the meeting was perfect for what she didn't know was about to happen. Multiple exits, good sightlines, and enough ambient noise to mask the tactical communications equipment hidden throughout. My clothing. As I sat across from Dr. Alexander Reed, watching him smile at Agent Santos with the practiced charm of a predator, I forced myself to remember that this man had murdered at least 3 women while making their deaths look like medical accidents. Jessica is exactly the type of accomplished woman I've been hoping to meet, Dr. Reed was saying, his voice smooth and professional. Elena mentioned you're in biotech. Fascinating field. I've always been drawn to women who challenge themselves intellectually. Agent Santos played her role perfectly, blushing slightly and leaning forward with interest. Sarah spoke so highly of elite connections and her experience with Marcus. It's wonderful to see successful couples who really support each other's ambitions. Dr. Reed's eyes flicked to me with what looked like genuine warmth. Marcus is a lucky man. Sarah, you look radiant. Marriage clearly agrees with you. The irony was so thick I could taste it. This serial killer was complimenting me on a marriage to another serial killer who'd tried to harvest my organs. If he only knew that Radiant Sarah was wearing enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small army. Marcus takes such good care of me, I replied, the words like poison in my mouth. He's always encouraging me to focus on my health, get regular checkups, make sure I'm taking care of myself properly. Dr. Reed nodded approvingly. A good husband should be attentive to his wife's well-being. Health is everything. Without it, we have nothing. Through my nearly invisible earpiece, I could hear Agent Richardson's voice. Target is displaying classic grooming behavior. Recording quality is excellent. Keep him talking about his methods. Do you have experience with that? Agent Santos asked innocently. Taking care of someone's health, I mean? Sarah mentioned you're a doctor. Dr. Reed's smile became more genuine, pride evident in his expression. Plastic surgery, primarily. There's something deeply satisfying about helping people become their best selves, both physically and emotionally. I believe in taking a holistic approach to wellness. A holistic approach that included murdering his patients, apparently. I watched his hands as he spoke, surgeon's hands, steady and precise. Hands that had held scalpels while cutting into women who trusted him with their lives. That's so admirable, Agent Santos gushed. I've always been nervous about medical procedures. I think I'd need someone I really trusted to even consider cosmetic surgery. Trust is essential, Dr. Reed agreed, leaning closer. The doctor-patient relationship is sacred. When someone puts their life in your hands, you have an absolute obligation to their well-being. The casual blasphemy of his words made my stomach clench. This man spoke about sacred trust while planning to exploit that exact vulnerability to commit murder. My earpiece crackled with an update from Agent Richardson. Strike teams are in position at all target locations. Dr. Vasquez is currently at Elite Connections. We have eyes on the building. Maintain conversation for 15 more minutes, then we execute simultaneous raids. 15 minutes to keep a serial killer talking while FBI teams prepared to raid criminal hideouts across 5 states. I glanced at my watch, noting that it was exactly 3:47 p.m. In a quarter hour, this nightmare would finally be over. Jessica was just telling me about her marathon training, I said, steering the conversation toward topics that would reveal Dr. Reed's victim selection criteria. She's incredibly disciplined about her fitness routine. Dr. Reed's interest sharpened immediately. Marathon running, that requires exceptional cardiovascular health. You must have excellent endurance, low resting heart rate, strong lung capacity. He was assessing her organs even while pretending to make small talk. The clinical detachment in his voice when discussing Agent Santos's physical condition was chilling, like a butcher evaluating livestock. I've been fortunate with my health, Agent Santos replied modestly. Good genes, I guess. My family tends to live long, healthy lives. Family medical history is so important, Dr. Reed agreed. Any hereditary conditions? Heart disease, diabetes, kidney problems? Nothing like that, Agent Santos said. Though I suppose I wouldn't know much about extended family history. My parents died when I was young and I don't have siblings to compare notes with. Perfect victim criteria, delivered with a vulnerable smile. Dr. Reed was practically salivating as he absorbed information about Agent Santos's health profile and isolated social situation. I'm sorry for your loss, he said with perfectly performed sympathy. It must be difficult navigating major life decisions without family guidance. Sometimes, Agent Santos admitted. That's part of why I'm interested in finding a real partner. Someone who can be my family, my support system, my whole world. The predatory satisfaction in Dr. Reed's eyes was unmistakable. He'd identified Agent Santos as the perfect victim, healthy, isolated, emotionally vulnerable, and looking for someone to fill the void in her life. My earpiece buzzed with another update. Dr. Vasquez is making phone calls, appears to be coordinating with associates. Strike teams report ready status across all locations. 3 minutes until the raids began. I needed to keep Dr. Reed engaged while positioning myself to assist if Agent Santos needed backup during the takedown. Have you thought about timeline? Dr. Reed asked Agent Santos. I know some people prefer long courtships, but when you meet the right person, sometimes you know immediately that you want to move forward quickly. I'm definitely ready for something serious, Agent Santos replied. I've spent so many years focused on my career that I feel like I'm behind on the personal side of life. I'd love to meet someone who's equally ready to commit. Dr. Reed reached across the table and touched her hand gently. I feel exactly the same way. Elena has such good instincts about compatibility. I have a feeling she's found something special. Here. Agent Richardson's voice in my ear. 2 minutes. Dr. Reed's body language suggests he's preparing to escalate contact with the target. Be ready to intervene if necessary. Dr. Reed was indeed escalating, his touch lingering on Agent Santos's hand, while his other hand moved to his jacket pocket. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might be reaching for a weapon, but instead, he pulled out his business card. I'd love to continue this conversation over dinner tomorrow night, he said smoothly. There's a wonderful restaurant I know, very private, perfect for getting to know each other better. The private restaurant would be another controlled environment where Dr. Reed could begin the grooming process in earnest. Agent Santos would never make it to that dinner, but she played her role perfectly, accepting the card with shy excitement. That sounds wonderful, she said. I'll look forward to it. My earpiece crackled with the final countdown. 30 seconds. All teams report ready. Initiate on my mark. Dr. Reed was signing the check when Agent Richardson's voice filled my ear. Execute, execute, execute. Within seconds, the restaurant erupted in controlled chaos. FBI agents emerged from positions I hadn't even known they were occupying, surrounding our table with weapons drawn. Dr. Reed's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to rage in the space of a heartbeat. "Dr. Alexander Reed, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder," Agent Santos announced, her entire demeanor changing from shy victim to federal agent. "You have the right to remain silent." Dr. Reed's eyes locked onto mine with sudden, terrifying clarity. "Sarah Chen," he said quietly, "Marcus's supposedly dead wife. I should have known." The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, but his gaze never left my face. "You have no idea what you've destroyed," he continued. "The network Elena built saves lives. We provide organs to people who would die waiting for the bureaucratic system, to match them with donors." "By murdering innocent women," I replied, standing as the agents prepared to escort him away. "By utilizing resources that would otherwise be wasted," he corrected coldly. "Young, healthy women who contribute nothing, meaningful to society, whose organs could save productive members of the community." The casual dehumanization in his voice was more chilling than any threat. To Dr. Reed, I wasn't a person. I was a collection of organs being wasted on someone he deemed unworthy of life. "How many?" I asked as the agents began leading him toward the exit. "How many women did you personally kill?" Dr. Reed smiled, an expression so cold it made my blood freeze. "More than the FBI will ever prove. And there are others, dozens of others, who will continue the work after Elena and I are gone." As they dragged him away, still spouting his twisted justification for serial murder, Agent Richardson appeared at my side with a tablet displaying multiple video feeds from the simultaneous raids. "Elite Connections is secure," he reported. "Dr. Vasquez is in custody, along with 4 associates. We've seized all computer equipment and client files." The video feeds showed FBI agents flooding Dr. Vasquez's office, where she was calmly shredding documents when they burst through the door. Even in handcuffs, she maintained her dignified composure, as if being arrested for running a murder conspiracy was merely an inconvenience. "Status on the other locations?" Agent Santos asked, slipping seamlessly back into her FBI agent persona. Agent Richardson scrolled through the feeds. "Dr. Webb's surgical facilities in 3 states have been raided. We recovered organ preservation equipment, forged medical documents, and financial records showing payments to overseas buyers. Webb himself was arrested at his Colorado facility." More feeds showed the arrest of Marcus's fellow husbands, men who'd been posing as loving spouses while preparing to murder their wives for profit. Each arrest was a small victory, another predator removed from the hunting ground where women like me had been stalked. "The women who were in immediate danger?" I asked. "All 8 have been located and are in protective custody," Agent Richardson confirmed. "Medical teams are evaluating them for poisoning symptoms and providing emergency care as needed." 8 women who would wake up tomorrow not knowing how close they'd come to being murdered by the men they'd trusted with their hearts. 8 women who would have to rebuild their lives after discovering that their marriages were elaborate murder plots. Rebecca appeared through the crowd of FBI agents, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. "It's actually over." But even as I returned her embrace, I couldn't shake Dr. Reed's final words about others who would continue the work. The network we'd dismantled was extensive, but was it complete? How many other Dr. Vasquez's were operating similar schemes? How many other elite connections were hunting for victims? Agent Richardson seemed to read my thoughts. "This was a major blow to the organ trafficking industry," he said. "But you're right to be concerned about other networks. What we've learned from this operation will help us identify and infiltrate similar organizations." The restaurant was now a crime scene, with forensic teams photographing everything and agents interviewing witnesses. The other diners who'd been enjoying their meals an hour ago were now part of a federal investigation into serial murder and organ trafficking. "What happens to Marcus now?" I asked as we prepared to leave. "With the evidence we've gathered from this operation, he's looking at multiple life sentences without parole," Agent Richardson replied. "Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, assault with a deadly weapon, racketeering, the charges will keep him locked up forever. Forever. The man who'd planned to harvest my organs would spend the rest of his life in a cage, never again able to hurt the women he saw as nothing more than spare parts. It wasn't enough justice for the lives he'd helped destroy, but it was something, We walked out of the restaurant. I caught a glimpse of myself in the window reflection, a woman who'd survived attempted murder and helped bring down an entire criminal network. 6 months ago, I'd been a naive wife who trusted her husband completely. Now I was someone who understood that evil could wear a wedding ring and speak words of love while planning acts of unfathomable cruelty. "There's one more thing, Agent," Richardson said as we reached the FBI vehicles. "The media is going to want to interview you, the woman who survived organ trafficking and helped expose the network. You'll have opportunities to tell your story, help other women recognize the warning signs." The thought of going public with my story was terrifying, but I knew it was necessary. Somewhere out there, other women were being courted by charming men who saw them as valuable organ donors rather than human beings. If my story could save even one life, the exposure would be worth it. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. "These women deserve to have their stories told." Rebecca squeezed my hand as we got into the FBI vehicle. "Dad would be proud," she said quietly. "You turned your survival into justice for others." As we drove, away from the scene of Dr. Reed's arrest, I thought about the women we'd saved and the women who'd died before we could reach them. The network was broken, the predators were captured, but the damage they'd done would echo through dozens of lives forever. The final hunt was over, but the real work, healing, justice, and prevention, was just beginning. 6 months after the Chai arrests, I stood before a packed federal courtroom as the lead witness in the prosecution of United States versus Elena Vasquez et al. The woman who'd orchestrated my attempted murder sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit, her silver hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the respected businesswoman she'd pretended to be. But now, thanks to months of investigation and testimony, everyone in that courtroom knew exactly what kind of business she'd really been running. "Mrs. Chen," Prosecutor Janet Walsh said, approaching the witness stand where I'd been testifying, "for the past 2 hours. Can you identify the person who recruited your husband to target you for organ harvesting?" I looked directly at Dr. Vasquez, meeting her cold, calculating gaze without flinching. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the defendant, sitting at the defense table in the navy blue suit. Dr. Vasquez stared back at me with the same detached professional interest she'd shown during our meeting at Elite Connections. Even now, facing multiple life sentences, she seemed more curious than concerned about the proceedings destroying her carefully constructed empire. The trial had been a media sensation for weeks. The Organ Bride case, as the press had dubbed it, had exposed a level of systematic predation that shocked even seasoned law enforcement officials. Every day brought new revelations about the scope of Dr. Vasquez's network and the sophisticated methods used to identify and process victims. Marcus, whose real name we'd learned was Michael Anthony Torres, had taken a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against Dr. Vasquez. He'd already been sentenced to life without parole on federal conspiracy charges and would spend the rest of his life in maximum security prison. Watching him testify about his methods for grooming and poisoning victims had been one of the most difficult experiences of my life, but also one of the most necessary. She taught us that the key was patience, Marcus had testified the previous week, describing Dr. Vasquez's training methods. You don't rush the process. You take time to build genuine emotional dependency, make the victim feel like you're their whole world. That way, when the medical issues start appearing, they trust you completely to handle everything. His clinical description of how he'd manipulated my emotions and isolated me from my support system had been devastating to hear. But it had also been crucial evidence for convicting Dr. Vasquez of running a criminal enterprise that had resulted in at least 12 confirmed murders. Mrs. Chen, Prosecutor Walsh continued, based on your experience and the evidence presented in this trial, in your opinion, what was Dr. Vasquez's role in the conspiracy to murder you? I'd prepared for this question during countless hours of victim preparation sessions. Dr. Vasquez was the architect of the entire operation. She designed the victim selection criteria, trained the male operatives in grooming techniques, coordinated the medical fraud that justified the surgeries, and managed the financial networks that sold the harvested organs. Without her organizational skills and leadership, none of these murders could have happened on this scale. Dr. Vasquez's defense attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Robert Chen, no relation despite the shared name, had spent weeks trying to paint his client as merely a businesswoman who'd been deceived by rogue associates. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Recorded conversations planning murders, financial records tracking organ sales, and testimony from victims who'd survived the network's targeting. The most powerful testimony had come from the other women who'd been saved. During the FBI raids, 8 women who'd been in various stages of preparation for harvesting, all of whom testified about the systematic poisoning and medical manipulation they'd endured from husbands they'd thought loved them. Jennifer Martinez, the software engineer, from Austin, whose husband had been preparing her for emergency gallbladder surgery, had testified about months of mysterious stomach pains that appeared and disappeared based on what her husband gave her to eat or drink. Medical analysis confirmed she'd been receiving regular doses of Ipecac and other emetics designed to simulate digestive disorders. Linda Park, the pharmaceutical researcher from Portland, described how her husband had convinced her she was developing early-stage kidney disease, complete with forged lab results and fake consultations with nephrologists who were part of Dr. Webb's network. She'd been scheduled for exploratory surgery that would have resulted in the harvesting of both kidneys. Each woman's story followed the same pattern: isolation from family and friends, systematic poisoning to create medical symptoms, manipulation by trusted medical professionals, and scheduled surgeries that would have ended in death disguised as surgical complications. The defendants ran a murder-for-profit scheme, prosecutor Walsh had argued in her closing statement. They identified successful, healthy women through elite connections, paired them with trained killers posing as loving husbands, and systematically prepared them for harvesting like livestock. This wasn't crime of passion or opportunity. This was premeditated, organized murder on an industrial scale. The defense had argued that Dr. Vasquez was a legitimate businesswoman who'd been manipulated by rogue medical professionals, that elite Connections was a real matchmaking service that had been infiltrated by criminals without her knowledge. But the evidence told a different story. FBI forensic accountants had traced the financial networks that connected elite connections to organ buyers around the world. Dr. Vasquez had maintained detailed records of every transaction, from the initial client fees paid by unwitting victims to the final payments received from black market organ purchasers. The international scope of the operation had been staggering. Organs harvested from American victims had been sold to wealthy clients in 12 different countries, with Dr. Vasquez personally earning over $15 million from the network she'd spent a decade building. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Margaret Foster asked as the 12 jurors filed back into the courtroom after deliberating for less than 4 hours. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman replied, standing with a folded piece of paper in his hands. I held Rebecca's hand. As we waited for the verdict to be read, she'd been with me through every day of the trial, providing both medical expertise to help me understand the evidence and emotional support to help me process the trauma of reliving my attempted murder in public. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant Elena Vasquez guilty. The word guilty echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Dr. Vasquez showed no reaction, maintaining the same composed expression she'd worn throughout the trial. On the count of racketeering, we find the defendant Elena Vasquez guilty. On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant Elena Vasquez guilty. On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant Elena Vasquez guilty. Guilty on all 47 counts. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before concluding that Dr. Vasquez was responsible for running a criminal enterprise that had murdered at least 12 women and attempted to murder 8 others. Dr. Harrison Webb had already been convicted on similar charges and sentenced to life without parole. Dr. Alexander Reed, the plastic surgeon who'd killed his previous wives, had received 3 consecutive life sentences. Marcus and the other husbands in the network were serving sentences ranging from 30 years to life. But Dr. Vasquez had been the mastermind, the architect of systematic murder disguised as matchmaking. Her conviction was the capstone of the largest organ trafficking prosecution in U.S. history. Dr. Vasquez, Judge Foster said during the sentencing, hearing 2 weeks later, "You perverted the concepts of love, marriage, and medical care to create a system for murdering innocent women. You preyed on their desire for companionship and exploited their trust in medical professionals. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." As Dr. Vasquez was led away in shackles, she turned to look at me, one final time. Her expression was still coldly professional, as if she were evaluating my performance as a witness rather than facing the consequences of trying to have me killed. "She's never going to understand what she did wrong," Rebecca said quietly as we watched the woman who'd orchestrated my attempted murder disappear through the courthouse door. "I don't need her to understand," I replied. "I just need her to never hurt anyone else again." The civil lawsuits came next. Elite Connections assets were seized and liquidated to provide compensation for victims and their families. The families of the 12 murdered women received substantial settlements, though no amount of money could restore the lives that had been lost. I donated my settlement to the Sarah Chen Foundation, a nonprofit organization I'd established to help victims of domestic violence and medical fraud. The foundation provided legal assistance, counseling services, and educational programs designed to help women recognize the warning signs of systematic manipulation and abuse. The foundation's first major initiative was a partnership with medical schools across the country to train healthcare professionals to identify signs of deliberate poisoning and systematic abuse. We developed protocols for emergency rooms and clinics to recognize patterns that might indicate someone was being prepared for organ trafficking. Medical professionals are often the first line of defense, I explained during a speaking engagement at Johns Hopkins Medical School. When someone presents with mysterious symptoms that don't follow normal disease patterns, when their spouse is unusually involved in their medical care, when there are frequent emergencies that lead to expensive procedures, these could be warning signs that require deeper investigation. Rebecca had taken a leave of absence from surgery to serve as the foundation's medical director. Together, we traveled the country speaking to medical professionals, law enforcement agencies, and women's organizations about the tactics used by organ trafficking networks. The psychological manipulation is just as dangerous as the physical. Poisoning, Rebecca would explain during our presentations. These men are trained to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities. They create dependency, isolate their victims from support systems, and gradually normalize medical emergencies and interventions. The speaking engagements were emotionally draining but necessary. At every event, women approached us afterward with stories of relationships that had made them uncomfortable, medical situations that hadn't felt right, or concerns about friends and family members who might be in danger. We helped 3 women escape situations that showed clear signs of organ trafficking preparation. Maria Santos, a research scientist from Miami, contacted us after recognizing the pattern of mysterious illnesses and urgent medical recommendations from her fiancé, of 8 months. FBI investigation confirmed that her fiancé was connected to a smaller trafficking network operating in South Florida. Jennifer Walsh, ironically sharing a name with one of Marcus's previous victims, reached out after her husband began pressuring her to update her insurance policies and mentioned unusual details about organ donation during casual conversations. Investigation revealed that he'd been researching black market organ prices and had connections to underground medical practitioners. Susan Park contacted the foundation after her sister expressed concerns about Susan's husband's unusual interest in her medical appointments and insistence on accompanying her to all doctor visits. The FBI discovered that Susan's husband had been gradually introducing small amounts of digitalis into her diet, preparing to claim she'd developed heart problems that required emergency surgery. Each successful intervention was a victory, proof that education and awareness could prevent other women from experiencing what I'd endured. But for every woman we helped, I wondered how many others were still trapped in relationships with men who saw them as valuable organ collections rather than human beings. The international investigations that grew out of our case led to prosecutions in 7 countries and the dismantling of 4 other organ trafficking networks. Interpol estimated that the networks connected to Dr. Vasquez's operation had been responsible for over 50 murders worldwide. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter that would change everything again. It was from Ana Rodriguez, a woman whose sister Carmen had been murdered by the organ trafficking network 3 years earlier. Carmen's husband had convinced her she needed emergency liver surgery, and she died on the operating table while Dr. Webb harvested her organs for sale. To a tech executive in California, "I know Carmen is gone forever," Anna wrote, "but reading about your foundation and the work you're doing gives me hope that her death wasn't completely meaningless. If you're still looking for people to help with your educational programs, I'd like to volunteer." Carmen was a teacher. She would have wanted her story to help protect other women. Anna became one of our most powerful advocates, speaking at events across the country about her sister's murder and the warning signs that families should watch for. Her presentations were heartbreaking, but effective, helping audiences understand the human cost of organ trafficking in deeply personal terms. Carmen was excited about her marriage, Anna would tell audiences. She called me every week to talk about how attentive her husband was, how much he cared about her health, how supportive he was of her career. I thought she'd finally found happiness. I had no idea she was being systematically murdered. The foundation also worked with lawmakers to strengthen regulations around organ transplantation and create better oversight of private medical facilities. The Carmen Rodriguez Act, named after Anna's sister, required enhanced background checks for medical professionals working in transplant-related fields and established new protocols for investigating suspicious surgical deaths. 3 years after my surgery, I stood in the same hospital room where I'd first learned about Marcus's betrayal. But this time, I wasn't there as a victim. I was there as the keynote speaker for the hospital's new training program on recognizing and responding to medical fraud. The most important thing to remember, I told the assembled doctors and nurses, is that victims of systematic poisoning and medical manipulation often don't recognize what's happening to them. They trust their partners and their healthcare providers completely. It's up to medical professionals to watch for patterns that patients themselves might not see. Rebecca introduced me that day as the woman who turned her survival into a mission, to protect others. But I knew that I hadn't accomplished any of this alone. Every victim who'd testified at the trials, every law enforcement officer who'd worked the case, every medical professional who'd changed their practices based on our recommendations, we were all part of a larger effort to ensure that predators, like Dr. Vasquez and Marcus, could never again operate with impunity. As I looked out at the audience of healthcare providers who were learning to recognize the signs of systematic medical abuse, I thought about the women we'd saved and the women who'd died before we could reach them. The work would never be finished. There would always be predators looking for vulnerable victims, always be new methods of exploitation to guard against. But for the first time since waking up in that recovery room 3 years ago, I felt something beyond survival. I felt purpose. Marcus had tried to reduce me to a collection of valuable organs. But instead, he'd inadvertently created someone who would spend her life making sure other women never faced the same fate. The scar from my appendectomy was barely visible now, a thin line that reminded me daily of how close I'd come to becoming another statistic in Dr. Vasquez's murder ledger. But it also reminded me that sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes you have to transform your trauma into a weapon against the people who created it. Dr. Vasquez, Marcus, and their associates would spend the rest of their lives in prison. The women they'd murdered would never be forgotten. And somewhere out there, women who might have become their future victims were living free because we'd fought back. That was justice. That was redemption. That was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.